Welcome to the Leadership by Design podcast, where thoughtful leaders share lessons from their journey. I'm Dave Adams, founder of the Business Freedom Group, and today we have Derek Downs. Welcome, Derek. I'd love to start off with you telling our audience a little bit about yourself, your company, what you do, and what your journey's been like to get here.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, and I appreciate you having me join you. It's always good to, kind of learn from others and, be able to share some of the experiences. So I'm Derek Downs. I'm currently the Vice President of Global Partnerships and Alliances at Catalon. And so Catalon is within the software quality space. So the testing of software and ensuring that you have, kind of the best possible quality available there. You had asked what brought me here. I would say, over my career, and as you can tell, a little bit of hair loss, my career goes back a little ways. Um, I, kind of started out in oil and gas in the marketing side of things. And back then, technology, unlike a lot of people today, it was still evolving. And I'm sure as you know, so I was in the marketing side and I started to see all this technology and things were really taking off. Got real interested in that, kind of transitioned over. And then once I plugged into kind of the technology side, partnerships, alliances, product marketing, I've kind of, been across a bunch of different organizations, both from a small startup, where you're just making sure you're making payroll and delivering all the way to larger enterprises. And so just across that journey, I would say, definitely had the opportunity to see some really, really great leaders and learn from them, as well as, some not so great leaders and also learn from them.
Sometimes they teach you even more.
It's exactly right. I mean, I just look back and I mean, there's, just some of those moments where, you're like, okay, that's something, this is really, really good. And you kind of just, take that and figure out how to make that your own, or, a situation where you see, hey, this really kind of blew things up. I need to make sure I don't, do that as part of it. So along those lines, just kind of gathered all of those experiences and then try to apply that now. Yeah.
Great, great. Well, since you mentioned some of those, good examples and anti-examples, if you will, how about a story or two?
Yeah, you bet. You bet. So, naturally, there's been a lot of, really, I would say good leaders, both in my company or professional as well as, personal. And the one thing that I found in a few of those is, um, the good leaders always kind of lean in, step in, and they take the responsibility, of whatever the situation is. I found that they tend to, try to, I say protect, but they almost kind of take a position of making sure that their team is well respected, received correctly, and really managed. And so I had one particular leader that, all of a sudden there was some situations that were, happening where I had made I would say, a bad decision in how we were doing a particular project. And so I was, scared to death that, this was going south and I was really at risk. And I can remember I had a leader that all of a sudden jumped in with senior leadership, and just called out the situation and took responsibility to say, hey, my team did this, but here's what we found. We learned quickly. We're adjusting, and now we're doing this. And I remember in that moment, just this, this sense that, wow, I'll follow that person through a burning building, and
Right.
so at that point, I worked to make sure I made even better decisions. I was a little more thoughtful, but in that moment, that leader really, really helped.
Great, great. Do you see any particular trends that leaders are struggling with at the moment, in your industry? What's sort of throwing them for a loop a little bit?
Yeah, I think, for those of your listeners that haven't heard, AI is really a common thing out there right now. And we definitely see within our space, because it's software quality, we're seeing more and more. I mean, to some extent, you're looking at 50 to 60% of code, kind of now being generated, with AI. I think when that starts to happen, it also means that there's, a bit of a black box, or there's a lot of unknowns. And we're seeing more and more concern, for people wanting to figure out, how do I validate? How do I verify? How do I make sure it is what it should be? And so that's also why we lean in pretty heavily. But within this space, what I'm also seeing is that from a leadership standpoint, things are moving so fast. All the leaders have to figure out, how do I take advantage of the technology and AI, and how do I make sure we're more efficient, and there's more pressure on me to do more for less and to figure out how to be more cost effective because of AI. I'm seeing some of those pressures at times where some leaders are taking a little bit of a shortcut, saying, okay, I can just let some people go and I'll have technology do that. And I think we're seeing where some of the messaging is overhanging the market. And the pendulum will swing back a little, because it's still absolutely critical that you have a human in the loop. You have somebody with judgment, that's able to recognize a situation for more than just, whatever the data, the data set might say.
And
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 so, yeah.
to be clear, when you say it's critical to have a human in the loop, do you mean a human in the development loop or also a human in the loop that is being developed? Or you might mean both.
Yeah, I think it does mean both. In my mind, I was thinking more around kind of the development, the production. How do you make sure that there's a person who's ultimately validating whether or not that needs to be done? But I think it's also from the standpoint, as leaders, we need to have humans in that loop, and on our team. I think it's an opportunity for us to look to further develop and expand our team's ability to play the role of assessing, verifying, validating, as opposed to just the role of producing and creating, because that portion is starting to shift a little bit with what technology can do.
Yeah, I imagine you're seeing a dramatic decrease in the programming time. But if I understood what you just said, that the QA time actually needs to go up because it's a bit of a black box. If somebody messes with the inputs in an unplanned way, you're not sure what's going to happen.
Yeah, and we're definitely seeing that. Although in the market, when I look at it, there's still a bit of a lot of people feel like, well, AI should be able to just do that. So it should just be automatic. I do think for a lot of companies, they're in for a bad situation to happen, that's going to force a recognition around the importance, of being able to validate and have the quality measured, and maintained. And I think so. A lot of our customers are kind of in that mode, and that's part of, I think, what we have to do is help guide people to understand the importance of having individuals on their team that are well equipped. So much like Iron Man, I mean, you can give them all the tools and capabilities, but it still needs to be that individual, as opposed to just saying, hey, let's outsource everything to, these bots. Yeah.
It's the first time I've heard the Iron Man analogy. I like it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you're literally lead your customers through that thought process, what challenges do you run into? What techniques do you try to use to get them to sort of move off of the straight cost reduction mentality and incorporate the quality mentality?
I would say one, it depends at times, who we're working with, because there's some individuals that are, very much operation mindset or kind of cost mindset. I would say in those particular scenarios, you just look to be able to figure out how can you show really kind of the negative cost or the risk, associated, that if something does go wrong, what is the real potential cost of that? If all of a sudden your customers have a major issue, what does that really look like? So we try to just help them see what would really bad look like. And right now you're not aware of it. I mean, we have others that I think are kind of more aligned to really customer satisfaction and making sure that the customer experience is at the top. And we found for those individuals, it's easier to show just the importance for maintaining, a high quality, around that customer interaction and that customer experience.
All right. Now, if we kind of switch back to you as a leader, what do you do to keep growing as a leader? And what impression do you want the audience to have of yourself and of your company after they hear this?
Yeah, I mean it's a good question. I think, being an older guy, a lot of times I think it's easy to say, all right, I've had so much experience here that okay, I know what this is like and therefore I can become kind of set, in the way that I do things. I think it's really important for everybody to be in a mindset where you keep your kind of core kind of belief structure, your guiding principles, you keep those rock solid, but you allow yourself to be completely open to learning new things. For me personally, it means how do I seek out, something new that's happening that I'm completely unfamiliar with, or quite honestly, I'm very uncomfortable about. So AI is a good example of that, or it could be in a certain area. And so just go learn about it, kind of read about it, find somebody who's doing it. And fortunately, I have 4 kids. And so a lot of times, they're saying, hey, Dad, this is what you got to look at this. So I'll go ask and get them to really show. And I think it's being, just making sure that you have a perspective or a learning philosophy where you're always wanting to learn, you're always open, to shifting and changing or gaining new skills. And I think, even for those of us that are older, the age the number goes away at that point. It's really more about just the way in which you approach, new things.
I like your comments on the staying open, continuing to learn. And I'm also thinking about that phrase that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes,
Exactly.
right? So,
Exactly.
um, for a while I worked in pattern recognition software
Yeah,
for equipment data. And to some extent, I think that's the job of people with big foreheads like us, right?
exactly.
Is to say that this pattern looks kind of similar. For me, what's going on right now in AI, I look back to the early
Yep,
days of factory automation. That was automating
exactly.
a physical task versus a knowledge worker task, if you will.
Yeah,
But
but it's still a very similar pattern. Yeah.
it's a very similar pattern, and people are overhyping it and
Yeah.
overextending it and that sort of stuff. So yeah, interesting. Okay. And who has had a significant impact on your journey as a leader?
Yeah. So I think this is where, again, there's lots of different ones, but I also look just an individual that's, been in my life that would always do just that. They would challenge me on when I would start to say, oh yeah, I know that, I've done that. Or, I would take more of a rigid position. And I had, one guy in my life that he would, kind of challenge me on that right away and say, so I'm hearing you're not open, and at first, I mean, I was kind of I'm like, no, I'm a smart guy. I'm always, but he kind of challenged me on it to a point where it was uncomfortable. And then I started to really, he said, just step back. He said, really reflect on it. What
Hmm.
do I mean by that? And that whole effort to be able to say, take the time to step back and reflect,
Hmm.
on the situation, that was a learning moment for me, to where I found anytime I'd be in a spot and I would make some comment about, oh, yeah, yeah, I know that, or yeah, this is exactly how it was, or we've done that before. Anytime that I would make one of those statements, it became this automatic where I could picture him,
Hmm.
telling me that I'm not being open. And it kind of just created a natural, almost trigger to be
Hmm.
able to say, "Oh, it's time to step back and really look at this. Am I being open?" Yeah, so that was really helpful for me.
Yeah, sounds like he provided you that trigger until you got into the habit of providing yourself that trigger.
Exactly. And to me, that's a great leader,
Yeah.
because, in the moment, the first time he did it, would I have said, oh, he's a great leader, and that's fantastic? No, because it was uncomfortable and it kind of challenged me. He wasn't just telling me how amazing I was, or what a great job I was doing. I mean, he was he was more concerned with how I was growing and developing than he was with how I was performing in that moment. Yeah,
Right. Sounds like he was really good at challenging with respect.
exactly.
Well,
I think that's a key point, Dave. I think there's also a way being a good leader or when you lead, it's being able to press and to confront, but doing it in a way that is respectful, still creating dignity, respect,
Mhm.
everything with that. I think that's really important.
You make me think back. I grew up in between New York and Boston, which are
Yeah.
both fairly confrontational
Yeah, I
towns,
was going to say it's a
right?
little different than down here in the South where,
So as I started to move around the world, around the country, I had to learn that not everybody wants it quite as in your face as the New York style.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And then later you start to really appreciate that because, in the South, sometimes the nice and nice, you have to learn how to read between the lines.
Well, not to get sidetracked, but I was once at a meeting with people from 23 different countries,
Oh, wow.
and we
Yeah.
were having a picnic lunch just to, change things up. And so out on the lawn, this beautiful, sunny day, I launched into the crowd what they saw as the differences between North and South,
Ah, interesting.
right? And the communications. And
Yeah,
it was so
yeah,
funny to hear like the German and the Austrian comment on
yeah.
it because the south of Germany is the north of Austria, right?
Exactly, exactly, exactly. They're a
So
little closer in all of that. Yeah,
yeah, but people are good, regardless of the shell.
yeah,
So,
exactly.
so how, I asked you how you learn or how you continue to grow. What do you think there's a fundamental difference between what you learn inside your organization and what you learn outside your organization?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the philosophy or the approach is the same. I think we naturally, at times inside the organization, we have some additional parameters, which is, whether it's corporate culture or, it's, a need to preserve your reputation there or, so there might be different parameters between the two. But I would say for me, just having that open mindset, of wanting to seek and learn and grow and develop, I think that applies also to your personal as well as, professional or within the organization or outside the organization. But I would say that outside, it's always good you have an opportunity to seek out um, others that have gone before you or, have exhibited, great skill or success in a particular area that you're needing to learn. And so I think there is the opportunity to be able to, do a search and find, hey, who's really, really good at this? And then figure out how to go talk to them and find out.
Great, great. Do you see a built-in tension between sort of the strategy of either inside your company or the partners and alliances that you're, and the culture? Sometimes people they want to play nice from a cultural standpoint as opposed to that challenge we talked about. And then
Yep.
there's strategy, which often challenges you a little bit more.
Yeah, I think definitely, especially when I look at, kind of partnerships and alliances, because there's always a bit of a challenge anyway, because you have kind of sales organization that's very, very focused on I've got to get this deal in this quarter. And then you have partners that might be involved in a project that's much longer term. And so it automatically creates this level of tension, that's going on there. And I think it does create a little bit of a perfect storm to where you have some of the challenges. And if the culture, is, hey, you got to get that in at all costs. Let's figure out how to hit our quarterly target. That type of a culture can really, really impact your ability to build kind of long-standing trust relationships, with partners. And so I find you can find yourself in a spot where you're having to do a lot of balancing, around.
And balancing, and by what you said, I would imply, you tell me if I'm right, you also have to often do a lot of repair.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I would say repair and then even kind of managing the reputation of the company, because there's times where it can become, viewed as at complete odds. And then, inside the organization, then there's the, hey, wait a minute, why aren't partners, bringing us opportunities and this and that? And it's like, well, let me tell you why. It's because we're not understanding their business, and
Right.
how we have to support them. And so we're viewed as not being a good partner.
Hmm.
And so I think, there's there's always situations, whether it's in the partnership world or in another part, of the organization. I think you're always going to have those tensions that come up that you
Mhm.
have to figure out, kind of how to manage through those.
Right. Okay. Well, we're getting close to the end of our time. Let's wrap up with asking you for an actionable step that one of our listeners can take to move them forward on their journey of being a more thoughtful leader.
You bet. And thinking about that for me as a leader, one of the biggest steps I took was a bit of a paradigm shift. I would say a little bit of a mindset shift where I was real focused on how do I become the best leader I can be? And what can I do? What steps can I take? What can I read? And a lot of it was about me. Over time, what I've found is when I shift that focus over to my team, not make it about me, but actually start to look at my team and say, hey, what are some things? How can I help them to have more confidence, to be stronger, to expand their value contribution within the organization, to be more recognized, to be highlighted? Excuse me. And what I found is the more that I shifted, I really focused on my team's success individually, I started to see that the overall team and the partner organization started to have a much stronger reputation and was more trusted and valued. And so, therefore, it started to help me to kind of improve as a leader because we started to have more, I'd say, success. But again, it goes back, for me, it was just clearly a mindset shift where it wasn't as much about, oh, how do I just make sure that I do things to improve me? I really shifted the focus onto my team and how do I help enable their development? Yeah.
That's great. That's great. Well, thank you again, Derek. It was a real pleasure. And to our listeners, thanks for tuning in to Leadership by Design to keep your thinking fresh with lessons from thoughtful leaders like Derek. So we'll see you next time.
Thanks so much, Dave. Thanks, everyone.